Have you ever experienced a profound sense of weariness that has nothing to do with a lack of sleep, but feels as if something far more essential has been steadily leached away from your core? This isn't the familiar fatigue of burnout from work, nor is it the ordinary stress born from difficult situations. It is the crushing weight of having given too much of your inner self away, too consistently, too thoughtlessly, and with too little awareness. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that no amount of caffeine can touch, a depletion that occurs when your spiritual vitality, your very life force, has been jeopardized by a ceaseless outpouring of emotional energy. Most of us don't even perceive this drain until the reservoir is almost dry. This is not some theoretical concept. It is a tangible, lived reality. A gradual corrosion of your mental clarity, your inner peace, and your very presence. When you find yourself perpetually explaining, perpetually on call, and perpetually soaking up the turbulence of others, you are leaking your essence into spaces that offer no replenishment. And before you know it, you become a spectator in your own life. Not a person who is haunted, but one who haunts the spaces they occupy, a presence that exists but barely inhabits its own form. You have been trained by society to equate love with constant availability, to believe that kindness necessitates endless sacrifice, and that to be needed is the same as being cherished. Yet none of this is the fundamental truth. The reality is both simpler and more stark. Your energy is a sacred resource, and it is currently under assault. Until you learn to protect it, everything you strive to create, your tranquility, your personal power, your forward momentum, will be built upon a foundation of sand. So now, the true work must commence. What truly exhausts you is not always the loudest event in the room. Frequently, it's the quiet concessions made in silence, the reflexive yes that escapes your lips, the unread notifications that lay claim to your focus, and the burden of emotional labor that no one ever sees or validates. You don't need to be embroiled in a high-stakes drama to feel spiritually drained. Sometimes it's the slow, steady erosion of your presence that inflicts the deepest harm. A small favor accepted here, a minor compromise made there, a smile you put on when your spirit feels utterly spent. Over time, these seemingly insignificant moments accumulate. Your energy doesn't simply disappear. It is expended, bit by bit, in countless small transactions you never consciously consented to. Most individuals are unaware that they are engaged in a perpetual exchange where their attention, their emotional capacity, and their time are withdrawn daily like funds from a bank account. The requests may be cloaked in politeness or framed as expectations, but the ultimate cost is unchanged. You start to sense it when your patience frays, when your thoughts begin to race restlessly, when a weariness settles into your bones for no apparent reason. There is no paper trail, but there is always a price, and the longer you choose to ignore it, the more spiritually insolvent you become. This erosion begins with small acts. You reply to texts you lack the capacity for. You linger in draining conversations to avoid rocking the boat. You silence your own boundaries because you've been taught that another person's discomfort must be your fault. Gradually, the version of you that existed before all these concessions becomes harder and harder to access. Your inner truth, your stillness, and your clarity don't just vanish. They get buried beneath accumulating layers of unspoken duties. In these moments, you are not truly living. You are simply maintaining. You are not fostering connection, but ensuring compliance. Relationships, regardless of how affectionate they may seem on the surface, often harbor hidden expectations that can bind your energy without your permission. When another person begins to value your responses more than your true self, your utility more than your spirit, the relationship's dynamic can become parasitic. You find yourself performing as a matter of course, saying yes even when every fiber of your being screams no. The most profound tragedy in this is that the people you are closest to may never even register the toll it takes, because the only version of you they have ever experienced is the one who gives unconditionally. The instant you acknowledge this deep imbalance is the instant the illusion starts to shatter. You begin to see precisely where your energy is flowing, who is drawing from your well, and how much of your existence has been dedicated to propping up what was fundamentally unsustainable. From this point forward, awareness itself becomes your first line of defense. And your presence is no longer granted automatically. Your silence is no longer a form of consent. What was once an unconscious pattern becomes a deliberate choice, and with that pivotal shift, the invisible transaction begins to lose its hold over you. You are no longer a mere resource to be tapped at will. You are a soul reclaiming its own center. Once you begin to truly perceive the cost of these invisible transactions, a fundamental part of you starts to shift. A quiet determination takes root, born not of resentment, but of pure recognition. You come to the profound understanding that giving without limit doesn't make you more cherished. It simply renders you more transparent, more easily overlooked. And so you start to pull back, not with the intent to wound anyone, but to rediscover yourself beneath the clamor of others' demands. In that strategic withdrawal, something extraordinary begins to unfold. The entire dynamic changes. Your absence begins to resonate more powerfully than your constant presence ever did. When you cease to appear on demand, those who had grown accustomed to your compliance are suddenly forced to reckon with the void where your energy once was. Some may become agitated, others may express confusion, but you finally begin to feel the air return to your lungs. Pulling back is not a sign that you have stopped caring. It is a declaration that you have finally chosen to care for yourself as a priority. This shift is not an act of coldness, it is a sacred duty. Your energy is no longer available for public consumption, and in the space it once occupied, your own clarity begins to flourish. The very silence that you once found intimidating becomes the substance that rebuilds your inner fortitude. The energy that was once perpetually flowing outward now turns inward, healing and restoring. Your nervous system, once pulled taut by constant external pressures, discovers a new, calmer rhythm. In that newfound stillness, you begin to perceive what you were previously too preoccupied to feel. Your own aspirations, your own intuitive voice, your own deep-seated exhaustion. Withdrawing grants you access to the facets of your being that had been submerged in the act of performance. This is not an act of evasion. It is a homecoming. You start to grasp that peace is not merely the absence of external chaos, but the steadfast presence of internal boundaries. And within that presence, your identity finds its footing and stabilizes. You are no longer a person who simply reacts to the events of life. You are now actively choosing how to engage with it. The power inherent in pulling back is not found in the discomfort it may cause others, but in the profound alignment it reestablishes within you. Those who only valued you for your function may push back against this new reality. Let them. Their unease is not a burden you are required to carry. Each time you consciously choose to pause, to withhold your energy from what depletes you, you are affirming a more profound truth. Your soul was not placed here to be consumed. It is here to be honored. The alignment that originates in stillness soon requires vigilant protection. Once your energy is no longer seeping into the expectations of those around you, a fresh challenge emerges, the task of keeping that energy contained and steady. It is one thing to reclaim your peace in solitude, but genuine transformation truly begins when you step back into the world and successfully resist the old impulse to give it all away once more. This resistance is not about constructing impenetrable walls. It is about cultivating emotional discipline, the practice of deliberately choosing when, where, and how your energy is expressed. Because clarity without consistency is brittle, and peace without boundaries is merely a fleeting state. Emotional discipline is not a cold or detached practice. It is presence infused with intention. It is the kind of presence that can listen without internalizing, observe without reacting, and feel without being overwhelmed. Every single time you feel a trigger, but consciously choose not to act on that impulse, you reinforce the vessel that holds your spirit. You begin to understand that an immediate reaction is not a sign of strength, but a form of surrender. A surrender of your energy to whatever person or situation has disturbed your inner equilibrium. Discipline, then, becomes your shield. Not a shield against life itself, but against your own ingrained habits of self-abandonment. You are under no obligation to provide a response to every provocative comment. You do not need to defend your existence simply because another person has misunderstood you. When your nervous system urges you to speak, to justify, to fight, you learn to pause. In that crucial pause, you take back your power of choice. You are no longer operating on instinct, propelled by the unresolved emotions of your past. You are standing firmly in the present moment, fully conscious of the cost of giving yourself away to conflicts that only seek your reaction, not your truth. Emotional discipline is the quiet declaration, not everything is entitled to a piece of me. It is also the acknowledgement that not every provocation is a personal attack. Some individuals project their inner turmoil onto you, simply because they lack the capacity to manage it themselves. Some discussions are not genuine dialogues. They are cleverly disguised traps designed to elicit a reaction, not to foster understanding. Protecting your energy is about discerning when your presence will be generative and when it will be consumed. It means disengaging from dynamics that feed on your frustration and choosing silence not from a place of weakness, but because you have become strong enough to refuse to waste your fire. In that choice, a much deeper power emerges. You no longer need to win debates to feel validated. You no longer need to justify your worth to feel whole. Your energy becomes your own again, not just in principle, but in practice. Emotional discipline teaches you to invest that precious resource where it will flourish, not where it will be strip-mined. Each time you withhold an impulsive reaction, each time you remain grounded instead of being triggered, you are not merely safeguarding your peace. You are building a life where your spirit, not your wounds, is in the lead. The practice of emotional discipline will inevitably lead you to a direct confrontation with the various roles you have been playing. As you consciously select stillness over reactivity and space over constant availability, what starts to rise to the surface is not only tranquility, but also the stark realization of how long you have been performing specific parts just to remain accepted. It becomes painfully clear that the compulsion to please is not a recent development. It began many years ago, perhaps as far back as childhood, when being the helpful child, the agreeable friend, or the emotionally perceptive partner became a strategy to ensure your safety, to be liked, and to feel indispensable. Over the years, these adaptive behaviors solidified into a core identity. The mask you habitually wear, whether it's that of the dependable one, the unshakable one, or the selfless one, was not created from a place of dishonesty. It was forged from necessity. When your unvarnished authenticity seemed to be too much for others, when your personal needs were consistently overlooked, when your truth was met with disapproval, you learned to adapt. You transformed into what others seemed to celebrate: available, reliable, and emotionally accommodating. But somewhere within that process of adaptation, you began to diminish. not physically, but in your essence. A soul that is repeatedly ignored learns to take refuge behind its function, and what was once a tool for survival slowly becomes a prison. This performance is not always a grand, theatrical display. More often, it is as subtle as forcing a laugh at jokes that subtly demean you, consenting to social plans that you know will exhaust you, or picking up calls that you dread answering. You may tell yourself that this is just being kind, but on a deeper level, it is driven by fear. The fear of what might happen if you were to stop the performance. Would they abandon you? Would they still value you? Would you still have a place? This is the nature of the erosion. When you begin to mistake being needed for being loved, when you start offering your energy, not as a freely given gift, but as a payment for connection. Inevitably, this way of existing becomes utterly unsustainable. Your spirit grows weary under the burden of your own unvoiced truths. The persona you have meticulously constructed begins to show cracks, not because you are failing, but because your authentic self is exhausted from waiting in the wings. A profound fatigue takes hold, not just physical, but emotional and existential. You find yourself surrounded by people but feeling utterly invisible. You walk into rooms where everyone recognizes your role, but not a single person, and it is then that the most profound form of loneliness can begin. The kind you experience when you are perpetually seen yet remain fundamentally unknown. This type of erosion does not announce itself with a shout. It speaks in whispers. It manifests as a persistent restlessness, a feeling that no matter how much you contribute, it is never quite enough. It shows up as burnout disguised as dedication, and as resentment masquerading as selflessness. You start to ask yourself, who am I when I am not performing for an audience? What is left of me when I stop trying to earn my place in the lives of others? And while these questions can feel daunting, they represent the very threshold of your liberation. Because the moment you begin to ask, the mask starts to lose its power. You come to understand that you do not have to be all things to all people. You only need to be honest with yourself. Reclaiming your spiritual energy demands more than just setting boundaries. It demands a radical truth, a truth that declares, I am not on this earth to be convenient. I am not here to inhabit roles that force me to be small. I am not here to perform more palatable versions of myself simply to keep the peace. You were never intended to vanish into your own usefulness. You were meant to be seen, felt, and truly known in your completeness, even if that means being misunderstood at times, and even if it means walking alone for a period. Because the self that steps forward when the mask finally comes off is not merely authentic, it is whole. And wholeness is what your spirit has been craving all this time. As the mask starts to crumble and your genuine self begins to step forward, a remarkable rearrangement occurs in the world around you. People who once found your presence reassuring may now feel unsettled. Those who celebrated your limitless availability might start to question your newfound silence. But this sense of external disorientation is not an indication that you are making a mistake. It is powerful confirmation that your personal frequency has shifted. You are no longer broadcasting the signal of someone who performs for a sense of belonging. You begin to see with startling clarity how often you have twisted yourself into uncomfortable shapes to avoid friction. How many times you have muted your own truth to uphold the facade of harmony. But illusions can only persist where the light is dim. As your own clarity brightens, it casts a light on all the shadows, both yours and theirs. And in that illumination, it becomes impossible to sustain what was only ever held together by self-negation. What begins to take the place of the old is not a louder or more aggressive version of you, but a more precise and centered one. You find yourself speaking less, but when you do, your words possess a new weight. You give less of yourself away, but when you do, it is with greater meaning and intention. You no longer feel the need to chase after approval, because your sense of worth is no longer a commodity to be outsourced. This new identity does not require external validation to feel secure. It doesn't pursue, it doesn't plead, and it doesn't waste energy on over-explaining. It simply exists, quietly, unapologetically, and in complete alignment with itself. And from that grounded stance, you start to attract people and experiences in a completely different way, not those who are drawn to your performance, but those who deeply respect your presence. You also come to realize that solitude is not a state to be endured, but something to be cherished as sacred. In the quiet, your energy field recalibrates, the mental chaos subsides, and your nervous system begins to heal. You stop paying attention to the echoes of who others wanted you to be, and start tuning in to the clear, steady signal of who you have always been. That identity, rooted in resonance and guided by an inner peace, is not something you have to build. It is something you simply uncover once all the external noise has been silenced. And in that quiet space, you finally meet yourself, not as a role or a reaction, but as the one who was always waiting patiently beneath the mask, whole, undiluted, and at last free to direct your own life. As your authentic self starts to take the helm, the yearning for solitude ceases to feel like an act of avoidance and becomes a fundamental necessity. After the shedding of old roles, the shifting of energetic frequencies, and the courageous step into alignment, sacred isolation provides what no external connection ever could: profound restoration. It is the inner sanctuary where the world's noise recedes, and your nervous system can finally take a full, deep breath. In this space, you are no longer contorting yourself to fit in, no longer censoring your voice to preserve a fragile peace. You begin to inhabit your own being completely, not as a response to others, but as a natural rhythm you have finally returned to. The stillness you discover is not a void. It is clarity being reintroduced to your system. In sacred isolation, you come to understand just how much of your life was lived in reaction, not out of conscious choice, but out of ingrained habit. You start to feel the gentle, persistent pull of your own intuition once again, reminding you of what you truly require. You allow yourself to rest without a trace of guilt, to disconnect without needing to offer an explanation. And you discover that your energy is at its most potent when it is no longer being perpetually bargained for. It is here that you stop performing your worth and begin to embody it. No validation is sought, no audience is required. Only your presence and the quiet, steady process of rebuilding your energy field. Through this essential reset, you do not simply regain lost energy. You